Hello, everyone. We're back. It's me, Peter Wanless, the chair of the Five Rights Foundation, the president of Somerset County Cricket Club, various other bits and pieces, and my podcast partner.
Hello, everybody. I'm back too after a couple of weeks' break, which has been absolutely wonderful, let me tell you. But I'm back fit and raring to go.
Remind us who you are.
Debra Allcock-Tyler, Peter's podcast partner.
Hi, Debra. It's great to see you. So you've had a proper holiday. You've been away. So
well, I have
relaxed.
No, it wasn't a great holiday, to be perfectly honest. The weather wasn't fantastic, and we were only actually in Crete for 8 days, and for 4 of those days my partner had food poisoning.
Oh no.
So we were rather restricted to our room, as we had to be near facilities that could be accessed quickly and urgently. And the weather wasn't brilliant, but it was a break. I stayed well away from emails, didn't know at all what was going on at work until I got back yesterday. Mostly stayed off social media. Looked at LinkedIn maybe a couple of times, but that was it, and then didn't bother engaging or sharing anything. So I do feel I had a proper reset in my brain. So I've come back feeling quite enthusiastic and fired up.
That's good, and nothing has changed really. We're still all talking about the downfall of the Prime Minister and the weather. It's either been far too cold or far too hot, the machinations of whether it's possible to be challenged as the Prime Minister, even when there's no contest going on, has rumbled along. I got to go to Downing Street in your absence.
Oh, did you?
Yeah, that's one of the things I've been up to. While you were
what were you
away. So it was one of these classic invitations that popped into my mailbox at about 3:30 on a Tuesday afternoon saying, will you come for a meeting Wednesday afternoon? You need to tell us by 9:00 tonight. And as it happened, I was coming up to London anyway. So I thought, you know what, it's a while since I've been to Downing Street. I'll pop along. And it was one of these many meetings that the Prime Minister and others are having about social media bans for under 16s. And it was a bit better actually than one of those classic round table events that you have where they invite 20 people, you all get 30 seconds to speak. All you can do is advertise your own organisation. No one listens to anybody else. And then at the end, the consultation says, we discussed with all these people X, Y, Z, and you feel you've been really used. So what they did was they set up 3 tables. They had a table of kind of civil society research experts and less expert people, and that was the table that I was on. They had a table of young people, which again was slightly ridiculous because it's good they're listening to young people, but to rustle up young people at very short notice during exam season is kind of ridiculous.
It is.
And a table of parents. And we were invited to discuss the challenges of a social media ban for under 16s. And I think the purpose was to illustrate that there are very strong views about this matter that are not always consistent with one another, meaning it's not quite such a slam dunk. We must get all under 16s off social media than some people might think. But you know what? I think we've reached a point now where something very significant has to be done as a package. So I have created my Peter Wanless 4 rules for what a successful response to this consultation would look like, and I do now know what I would do if I was the Prime Minister.
Can you tell us?
So shall I try it out on you and see what you think? So I think the first thing, of course, is the wrong question. Simply saying we will ban under 16s from social media kicks them off a small number of dangerous places. But if there isn't follow through and structure to all of this, a number of adults feel good about saying they've done something, but actually very little happens as a consequence. And this is what we're seeing in Australia. There's great positive intent to demonstrate that there is a different norm, but in practice, how much has changed. And in Australia, they aren't just doing that; they're doing a whole sort of other things, including some things which we're already ahead on in this country. So my 4-point plan is, number one, I think there's got to be a circuit breaker now. Everyone is completely fed up. It is utterly unacceptable, the number of young people who are on social media when they really shouldn't be, and the things they're seeing which are disgusting and inappropriate and all the rest of it. So I would ban companies or certain sites or certain I would ban certain companies and certain sites from accessing our children until they can prove that what they are delivering is what we want them to deliver. And
big tick from me.
Yeah, and if that's 16, fine. It could even be 18 in some circumstances, but it remains unacceptable. Now, the trouble is, and the kind of kickback there's been from people who've worked in this area for quite a long time, is that if you stop there, you're kind of letting the companies off the hook because you're dealing with the symptom, you're not dealing with the problem. So my number 2 test is that we've got to have a massive step change in compliance. So you can't just say these things. You've then got to follow through and enforce them. And it actually, for some years now, the Information Commissioner's Office have been responsible for enforcing the fact that personalized algorithms and so on should not be served up to under 13s. And yet we know that is happening. On the big sites, they nearly all have 13 as a minimum age requirement, but we know from Ofcom research that came out last week that 3/4 of 8 to 12-year-olds are on these sites. So number one, there needs to be the circuit breaker, but number 2, there needs to be a step change in the pace and the effectiveness of compliance. Then number 3, and I think everyone agrees with this, is that there needs to be safety by design, that these companies should design services which are age appropriate in the same way that we don't ban kids from accessing electricity or traveling in cars or whatever it might be, or drugs. There's loads of examples, and it's just all of that is taking a very, very long time to establish through regulation and the courts, but that doesn't mean it's the wrong thing to do. So we've got to establish that and then accelerate the progress, and that means really ensuring that the regulators have the power and the opportunity to disrupt business models, not just write letters to people saying, could you please tell us what you're up to on XYZ? And then my number 4 is there needs to be some sort of leadership on definitions here. So the government is looking to the regulator is looking to the government, civil society are looking at one another. What do we want childhood to be? What do we want from these services, in a positive sense as well as a negative sense? And one thing Australia does have is an e-safety commissioner who takes a role and a responsibility for something as well. It would be great if we had an e-safety commissioner in this country who could set and the definitions which everyone then rallied round. Now, whether the government were willing to cede that power or control to an individual, I don't know. But at the moment, if they're not willing to take it on themselves, then give it to someone at arm's length.
But it's actually a great idea, Peter, because this is one of the emerging challenges of our age. And we have a minister for practically everything else.
Yeah.
You name it, the obscurest of conditions and there'll be a minister for it. And yet this is affecting what proportion of our population is children? 20%, 30% or something like that? Yeah, whatever, 20%, yeah. Is that, that's a bit.
Yeah, 20% of our population, 100% of our future.
Exactly, you told me that. I love that. But, so it makes, and actually it's not just children, that's the other thing about it, because adults are subjected to inappropriate. Do you know what I mean? In other words, we all need protecting. We all need somebody to make the companies hold themselves accountable. Because we talk about kids because we feel they're the most vulnerable, but actually there are an awful lot of us as adults who are also being put in vulnerable circumstances and ending up, So the whole thing,
100%.
I love your plan. And I think that's just not restricted to children. I think that's across the piece,
Yeah. You
put
start
somebody
with
in charge of it, give them 4 things to get on with. Brilliant, Peter. So if you so do you write to Keir Starmer? Do you write to Andy Burnham? Do you write to Treaty?
They've done they've had their consultation now. They've had 89,000 responses. They've got to make sense of it all. As soon as the government adopts something, unfortunately, I think at the moment they will be slaughtered for it. Absolutely. Because everyone disagrees with what the government says. But so long as they act in more than in I would say all 4 of those things, but 3 out of 4 of those things. The companies and the media have done a good job of playing people in civil society off against one another, saying you must either be for the circuit breaker or you're for safety by design. And actually, we need
all
both.
of it. Yeah, exactly.
So Anyway, that was fun, and I met Larry the cat while I was at Downing Street. What else have I been doing? Somerset have won their first 2 games in the T20 Blast. No one's ever retained that trophy before, so we're off and running. On Friday night, it took me a while to leave the ground because people wanted to have selfies with my son. He's now the famous member of our family, following his TV stardom, and that's a revelation and an interesting kind of insight into how communications works these days, because he's been on a TV show, a terrestrial TV show, but actually the noise, the engagement, the fame, if you like, comes from little cut up snips and reels which are put on
social media,
TikTok and Instagram and this sort of thing. And for a little while at least, he's become a bit of a celebrity, and fair play to him. He's handling it in a very sensible, straightforward way, I think, acknowledging it for what it is. There's a bit of a bubble, a kind of moment in time, but also potentially there's a character there that is giving him some kind of confidence and relevance beyond his bedroom and the confines of the village.
It's like watching what's happened to Bertie. It just makes me think so much about how giving someone the gift of confidence, giving someone the gift of self-belief, giving someone the gift of thinking that, I have interesting things to say and people are interested in what I say, is absolutely priceless. Because when somebody feels that, when you receive that gift, you feel amazing, don't you? You feel you can take on the world. You feel you're less afraid of everything, when you're given that. So I just think, looking at Bertie and what's happened, you just sort of think, how can we extrapolate that lesson about what's happened to Bertie as a young man?
And one thing that's happening is that because that's sort of what he stands for now, as this kind of character that has been created, he is delivering messages to other people who want to say to members of their family, you've got this.
Yeah.
Which is, in the kind of jargon of social media, that's a way of kind of monetizing his presence. But so I think he's reacting to that pretty well. But your wider point reminds me, and we may have talked about this before, but one of the very best learning sets I've ever been involved with other leaders was where you share a problem and the other people in the group help you out with the problem. But in addition to that, at the end of doing the round of hearing from people, each person says one thing they appreciate about the person who's sharing the problem. And that really, in exactly the way you're describing, makes you feel great, because these people that you're getting to know over time, and every time you meet them, they're saying back to you something about you that is impressive.
We know this really, really well at DSC. So Peter, that our 2 core values are excellence and empathy. And the very first item on every single leadership monthly leadership meeting is we review our values as a leadership team. So we look at how have we behaved and all the rest of it. And what it's turned into is the leaders in the team taking every opportunity they possibly can to big up somebody else. Like without fail, sometimes they'll say, I didn't deliver well on this value this time. People always say, never mind, you couldn't help it. But most of the time what they're doing is they're offering appreciation. And I think it's really one of the reasons why my senior leadership team works so well together. because they get appreciated by each other publicly, vocally, in front of each other all the time. I mean, sometimes there'll be one individual. So we always joke about the fact that Jose, our podcast producer, we went through a spate of, of monthly leadership team meetings when it was, everybody was saying, can I, just say Jose did an excellent thing or whatever. Sometimes it's Shireen, sometimes it's others, but you can really see how appreciated those managers feel, mostly because they see that their colleagues noticed what they were doing. So actually, it's not that hard to introduce into organisations to create the space where people can comfortably, without feeling embarrassed, say positive things about each other, which builds their kind of confidence and also builds the trust and communication between the team.
It's not that hard in life either, is it? Yeah. I mean, just listening to you speak, I'm thinking I'm going to go and appreciate 3 people doing 3 different things today. There was a lovely message on the local Facebook group, a bank holiday Monday. So many people are going down to the tip with their garden rubbish and clear outs and it was 30 degrees or whatever. And someone put up a message from the team who work at the local tip, who I must admit I've always thought are very good. And the 2 sisters, Becky and Angela, well, Angela especially, when she takes her stuff down to the dump, she always appreciates how they help her out. They never seem to help me out in quite the same way, but nevertheless, they're very kind of friendly down there. And this message was just a thank you from them for appreciating the number of people that thanked them for working in the heat and brought them ice creams and ice lollies and cold drinks through the course of the day. And you just think that's, I was going to say it costs nothing. It doesn't cost very much to be appreciative of people around you.
Yeah, and it's just acknowledging people. I mean, one of the things I was taught very early on from my mum, because when we were younger, we didn't have a huge amount of money. My mum had to have 2 jobs. My dad was away. Obviously, he was in the army. He was always somewhere, and she did 2 jobs. So she worked at the Wimpy. Remember the Wimpy?
Yeah,
which doesn't exist anymore. I think it's still in America, but not here. And she
Brunch Benders were the names of the sausages.
And she also worked in Sainsbury's. And she said the 2 things that she really hated about the job was the way nobody acknowledged her. So when she was on the cashier's thing, she would be booping through, or punching in those days. Of course, they didn't have boops, did they? Punching in the product of the customer, and they wouldn't say anything to her. They wouldn't say good morning. They wouldn't smile. They wouldn't look her in the eye. And she said, and it was the same when she worked as the waitress. Like, when she came to put food down, they didn't move out of the way to help put it in place. They didn't look at her and say thank you. And so she's taught all of us that, even if you're in the middle of a conversation at the table, you stop that conversation to acknowledge the waiter or waitress or whoever who served you, and the same in the supermarket. And, it does make such a difference. And it's so easy to do. It's so easy to do if you think my job is to make sure that other people feel good when they encounter me.
Yeah.
And if you think that, giving compliments and praising people. I mean, actually, funny thing happened. Just before I went away on holiday, I was up in London for something or other, I can't remember now. And this woman came chasing after me down the platform. I thought, oh my God, what's happened? And she said, I just had to stop you and say your outfit is fabulous. And I was on cloud 9 for the rest of the day, you know. Although, mind you, only some people get away with it. If a bloke does it, I'd be deeply suspicious and wondering if I'm being stopped. But anyway, I think that's the message. It's so easy to make people feel good about themselves. And if people feel good about themselves, they are better to other people.
Yeah, definitely. Well, we're in danger of agreeing vigorously on this. And no, because people, exactly. People who listen to the podcast say they like it best when we're arguing with one another. So here, so you put something up on LinkedIn which surprised me about this whole business of Peter Murrell, the treasurer, wasn't he? I think of the Scottish National Party, who has pled guilty to embezzling over £400,000 of funds. And there's this kind of iconic issue of the motorhome, which he bought cash, didn't park at his home, parked at the mother-in-law's or whatever, but also spent money on all sorts of other bits and pieces. And there's incredulity that this could have gone on for so long, given that he was responsible for the funds of a major political party and married at the time to the leader of that party. And so Nicola Sturgeon, who was the leader at the time, has taken a lot of stick as a consequence. So I'm not going to put words in your mouth. You share with us your thoughts on this situation.
Well, it just triggered for me play that I've seen over and over and over again in my life and in the lives of other women around me. And that is women getting the blame always for the behaviour of men. So, we talk about, I was, my partner deceived me for years. I had absolutely no idea. But people said to me, well, how did you not know? It was so obvious. Didn't you pick up the clue? No, I loved him and I trusted him, and this is what happens in relationships. So I'm absolutely sure that Nicola Sturgeon loved her husband and trusted him. And when you trust someone, do you interrogate them all the time? You trust that other people are also doing their job. So that's the first thing. The second thing is she's been cleared. There was a massive investigation into her, which took months and months and months, which I assume was done thoroughly. And basically people wanted to find her guilty. So, it would have been easy to do so. And she was completely cleared of all wrongdoing, well and truly investigated. And because the other thing about this, Peter, is that these men who cheat and deceive and lie and fraud, they are very, very clever men. They are manipulative, they are charming. So I could totally imagine a conversation where Nicola says to Peter, over breakfast, somebody says something about this expenditure in the accounts. Is it all right? And him saying, are you saying you're not trusting me, your own husband? You know what I mean? It's this is how things happen in real life. So I absolutely believe she didn't know. And I know, and we get it in domestic abuse. You get women why didn't you stay? Why did you stay? Why didn't you leave? Why didn't you X, Y, Z? And it's always the woman's fault. It's the woman who doesn't leave, doesn't make the decision, doesn't spot the problem, doesn't confront the mistake. And you hardly ever, ever hear it the other way around. So you don't hear that, he should have known X, Y, Z. It's rarely the other way around. So it angers me enormously. But it's more about the macro thing. That for me was just a segue into this still happens in society. I mean, look at Prince Harry and Meghan. All the stories about that he's an incapable, incompetent man, unable to make any decisions of his own, is completely moulded and influenced by his wife, which is bullshit. It's absolute nonsense. He's an adult man who is completely capable of deciding he wants to have therapy or write a book slagging off his brother and, his family. So it really winds me up and I can't bear it. We've got to stop blaming the women. Make people who do the crime be responsible for their own actions and don't look for other people to blame for them.
Yeah, so it's an interesting take, and it's I understand and appreciate your opinion on it. It would not be my top take on that situation. It would be my sort of maybe fourth or fifth or sixth. But you might say that, well, that's because you're a man. You don't know or understand this properly. My take on this situation, and I was going to suggest we talked about this situation because I thought it was interesting from governance and leadership point of view, and I had some different analogies to associate with the story. So the thing about this situation is that Peter Murrell and Nicola Sturgeon weren't just husband and wife, but he was the general secretary or the treasurer of the political party which she was the leader of, and they had a professional relationship and they had a political relationship. And we know from all sorts of examples and stories which we could draw on in the charitable world that there are heightened dangers when people employ their brothers, their sisters, their husbands, because of your observation that we love someone or there's something else going on, or we'll let that contract to our brother over here because he's giving us mates rates and he means well and we trust him, and is that the right thing to do? So there was something about the requirement of a leader, particularly in a kind of public situation, to be curious and questioning about what's going on. Now, that doesn't mean you can't trust anybody, but it does mean I think I've really strong quality in the best leaders. And I thought at the time Nicola Sturgeon was a very effective political leader. But curiosity is a really important trait in leaders as well, isn't it? And asking the right questions when things are rumbling away for a period of time is a useful trait to have. And I was going to compare the situation in the SNP with this case which came to a head and was reported on when you were away, about a care home in Northamptonshire called William Blake House, where some families were worried and concerned and upset by the quality and the effectiveness of the care that their relatives were receiving, and couldn't understand why the finances of the home were in such a kind of parlous state. And again and again and again, they were rebuffed and told, no, it's fine, nothing to see here, everything is all right. But they were described in The Guardian as accidental activist families. They just couldn't believe, they wouldn't accept what was going on. And in the end, they managed to trigger an inquiry by the Charity Commission.
That's a great story.
Exceptionally, who found that the finances were all over the place, and the trustees were not doing what they should have done, and the levels of service weren't what they should be. So it was a huge kind of triumph for the customers, if you like, the voices at the front line. So I was going to suggest we could have a conversation about how do you suspend disbelief as a lever, and how much should you listen to frontline voices and customers and users of your services, because there's an occasion like William Blake House where in the end it all comes good and the regulator comes behind you and you think, oh my goodness, if only we'd listened to them at the beginning. And then at the same time, I can think of examples from my times in education where schools have been absolute basket cases, and parents just haven't seen the terrible quality of the service which is being delivered, and they feel a kind of blind loyalty to their local services and the teachers they know. And yet, as a system, you can see they're being really shortchanged. So techniques for knowing who to listen to and how seriously to take them is a kind of fascinating thing. And I was going to put Nicola Sturgeon in that kind of box of not being curious enough.
No, you're right to. You're absolutely right to. So looking at it now from a different angle, not now. I mean, I can absolutely see this different angle. I think there is, there's definitely something about, as a golden rule as an organisation, you should never permit a married couple to be boss and thing of each other, or any family really. I think that's very, very difficult for anybody to manage. And especially, when you have a relationship outside of the professional relationship, it's really difficult. You have to prioritise. And most of us as human beings will prioritise our personal relationship completely understandably. I'm not going to sacrifice my love for my husband for this job, if you see what I mean. So firstly, trustees should absolutely just take that as a principle. It's not good practice. Of course, it often happens in early startup stages or in smaller charities because you don't have a choice. You have to convince your mum and your great aunt to come and sit on the board as trustees. But I think there has to be some parameters around it. So you can create some. And in fact, a simple checklist of questions that you have to ask every board meeting. You ask of the treasurer, how much money have we got in the bank? Have we done the bank reconciliation? That sort of thing. That goes to help. But actually, it's not just restricted to family, because it's also about friendship. Because, I see it all the time. When a chief exec has got really, really close to a particular senior member of staff who they see as their number one, their backup, they completely trust them. And even though they don't mean to do it, inadvertently that person gets favoured quite a lot. So they, get given the great jobs and things like that. And what happens is everybody always knows that person's a favourite. And then what happens is that person then suffers because the rest of the group are like, well, of course, she's always gets listened to because the boss likes her, the best sort of thing. So I think as leaders, you've really got to manage those relationships well. I think you have to make an absolute golden rule, which is like and get on with everybody, and never do something for one senior member of staff that you wouldn't do for somebody else. So if you go out for a drink with one of your directors, you need to offer to go out for a drink with every single one of your directors, or don't go out with any of them. That's been my absolute golden rule. You have to treat them the same. You have to, if one of them gets invited over to your house for a one-to-one, they all have to be invited to your house for one-to-one. Do you see what I mean? It's like creating those rules, because I've seen family stuff, but I've seen more massive cock-ups and we see it with chairs and chief executives who get really, really close and, get on incredibly well together, and the rest of the board feels alienated, isolated, or, what's the point of us? Or on boards where you see a group of trustees who are like become really, really good mates, and then it becomes this little exclusive clique. And it's hard to do professionally, but it can be done. I mean, I absolutely adore all of my team. I don't think any one of them would say they were closer to me than any other one, or vice versa. I think they're all fantastic, and I talk to them all, and we've been working together a long time. But I hope that I manage to not have special relationships with people, because it's just, and it's awful when it goes wrong, and it nearly always does.
I'll tell you a funny story just as we finish of a politician. I won't name them, but they held one of the great offices of state and left under a slight cloud, or in difficult circumstances, and the members of the civil service board kind of that evening had a dinner together, because they were in that kind of betwixt and between. The old Secretary of State had gone, the new one was just coming in, and they just wanted to compare notes and think, oh my goodness, we got through that. And this particular Secretary of State was a bit of an acquired taste. Anyway, they're having their dinner, and one of them says, nevertheless, wasn't it really nice that on leaving, this person gave this gift to me? And someone else said, yeah, it was really nice to get a gift. And there were sort of 7 or 8 of them around the table, and half of them had got a gift and half of them hadn't.
Oh, my God. That's terrible. The same thing happened, actually, very quickly before we closed, because I know we've run out of time. When I was at the Industrial Society, we had a chief executive at the time. I won't name names because there's no point. But unfortunately, this particular individual they did have a set of people they favoured. And there's one particular year where they had an event in their office. They had a very big office with like a separate sort of room. And a number of chosen people were invited to come along to these Christmas drinks in their office. And it was awful. So those of us who were on the list, which I was, and went, which of course you would do.
Yeah.
I mean, the backlash from others in our peer groups who hadn't been on the list invited, and the accusations of sucking up and brown nosing and things like that. So so you have to do it for everybody, Peter. And let's end on that. Make everybody feel special. Everybody. That's
all right. Yeah, make everyone special. And I'm going to go off now and appreciate at least 3 people in the course of my day.
Yay! Try not to do it in a stalkery way, Peter.
No, I will. And I appreciate you. Thank you for your time, despite your idiosyncratic thoughts about Nicola Sturgeon. I do get where you're coming from. And we'll see you all next week.
Yeah, see you next week. Bye, everyone.
Bye.